Welcome to AffiliateCon Virtually Live, the first of many coming your way in 2021. I'm your host, Tim Poole from Gambling Insider, and thank you for becoming an AffiliateCon Club member and joining me for a morning of engaging and educational content. For today's show, we're joined by Bastian Grimm, CEO and co-founder of Peak Ace, who will kick us off, and he'll be followed by Hayley Stansfield, Head of Content and PR BlueClaw, both with presentations on SEO. Closing our agenda is an interview with the Responsible Affiliates in Gambling Chairman, Kian Nugent, also Managing Director Racing of Spotlight Sports Group. AffiliateCon Virtually Live is supported by 7 Stars, G&G Affiliates, Active Wins, 24/7 Partners, Neato Partners, Come On Connect, Kashi Mashi, Stars Affiliate Club, 22Bet, Karamba, Kindred Affiliates, Bet It On, Play Attack, and Bet365 Affiliates. And we'd like to thank all of these brands for their support. We hope you enjoy this show. Over to you for our first talk, Bastian.
Hey guys, it's Bastian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Peak Ace, and we are a Berlin-based full-service performance marketing agency. Thanks very much for having me. We're gonna do a deep dive into Google's Corvette Vitals, and so everything and anything around web performance really is kind of what's on the agenda for today. Before we get into it, I kind of have a bit of a confession to make, and that is that I am really, really impatient. So for me, there's nothing worse than having to wait for anything to load. It just literally drives me somewhat insane. And also, and I think you probably by now think that I have lost my mind, but I found GDPR actually pretty cool. Well, to be fair, not the entirety of GDPR, but so there's one example that I want to share, and I think then it gives you a bit of context. But there's the publication in the US which is called the USA Today, and obviously they're serving clients not only in the States but also in Europe or the European Union in the wider sense. And when GDPR came into place, what they had to do obviously is they had to kind of become compliant for the European readership. And what they did is they kind of built a site that's essentially entirely stripped down. On the right-hand side, you can see some comparison of web performance metrics, basically showing that, well, if you look at render times, but also load times in general, that this site is actually significantly faster, right? So it took roughly 19 seconds for the US side, or still does, only 0.9 for the European side, and they essentially eliminated all the JavaScript, which was mainly tracking and banners, reduced therefore a whole amount of requests, etc. So I hope you can see where I'm coming from. These sites really now all of a sudden are fun to use, and I think we as marketers are somewhat not, well, let's say we kind of played our part in the fact that websites somewhat became slow. Quick recap on users' expectations. This is a study taken from Nielsen. We will essentially lose half of our people because they will leave a website if it doesn't fully load within 3 seconds. So expectations are quite clear. And for me, really, performance is about user experience, because kind of this fast loading time really plays an important role in the overall user experience, right? So this is nothing new. Just a very quick recap. Page speed already is a ranking factor, right? But what most people tend to forget is that performance is somewhat a relative concept. So a site might be fast for one user, but very slow for another one, because, well, it could be on a slow network with a low-end device, right? Or 2 sites may finish loading at the exact same time, yet one somewhat may seem to load faster, maybe due to a progressive enhancement. Or, a site might appear to kind of somewhat load quicker, but then actually responds slowly, so it just feels like clunky, right? You tap on something and nothing happens, which is also really frustrating. Which is why Google introduced something that's called the Corvette Vitals. And important to note here is this is the 2020 set, so there might be changes coming in the future. Essentially, this consists of 3 different metrics. Largest contentful pane, first input delay, and then cumulative layout shift, CLS in short. They also give you somewhat reference numbers, so kind of the areas, or let's say ranges, that you need to aim for. How to get to those numbers and how to measure them, I think for those that are a bit familiar with the topic, you already can recognize the logo. The answer is Google's Lighthouse, and the reason is, so Lighthouse brings a whole bunch of different types of metrics. Some can be seen here on the left-hand side. Could be those that I mentioned, but can also be things like blocking times and a lot of other things. Historically, we have been measuring just the load event. However, that is because that's a well-defined event, but it does not necessarily correspond with anything a user really cares about. So we have this shift to now use multiple metrics. If you're not familiar with Lighthouse, very quick as an overview, and I'm kind of happy to share the slides. So if you're watching this, feel free to email us hi@pa.ag. We'd be happy to share the slides. So essentially, Chrome brings Lighthouse by default. So you can just right click on the page, click inspect element, so you get into Dev Console or Dev Tools, and then there's a tab that says perform an audit, and then you can run it, and that's about it. There's also a Chrome extension that makes it a bit easier accessible, or if you have to scale things, if you don't need the interface, you can of course run it also as a CLI, so in the command line interface based on a node module. So three different ways of doing it. As I said, Control-Shift-I, that's for Windows, obviously. Find the Lighthouse tab. There's some settings that you can go through, should be going through. Definitely make sure that the performance category is checked. Select the device type, mobile, desktop. Quick reminder here, if you're not familiar with it, running web performance audits should be done in incognito modus. So just make sure that you have a fresh, clean incognito open, because plugins and whatnot, and I think we as SEOs tend to have a lot of them kind of running on the local machine. Well, that has an impact on performance, so the numbers might be flawed. What you'll be getting is something that looks a bit like this. Basically, this is a Lighthouse report overview. Right-hand side on the top, you have various options, as well as kind of you can import and stuff like that. Left-hand side, you get different types of numbers. Again, we care about the one that says performance, and then you have a detailed kind of measurement breakdown using kind of the most common metrics. We touched on that as well as, which is quite helpful, a film strip view, so you can kind of basically browse the site and then understand when which type of kind of event or performance metric actually kind of became available, right? So yeah, and then you can drill down, of course. So it gives you an opportunity section, it gives you diagnostic section, and then you can basically go into the different types of recommendations here. So it tells me in this case to kind of eliminate random blocking resource. So it gives me also timing, so the time that I can actually save if I do it properly. And then you can zoom in for a whole lot more info. So it kind of gives you also which kind of files or URLs are affecting this, etc., etc. Keep in mind that metrics are measured in one of two ways. That's very important. And you can find them in DevTools, performance, and then the timings. But there's lab data, which is essentially using tools to somewhat simulate page load. This is kind of in a controlled environment. So that's the one way to do it. The second, and that's kind of the real world data, is what we call field data. So it's on real users actually loading and interacting with the page. So that takes into consideration, of course, different types of browsers or devices in general, different types of connections, different types of like features of the mobile phones being used and whatnot. So this is really like the real world data. You can track pane timings if you want to in your Google Analytics. There's something that's called the Performance Observer. Better to be using the Web Vitals JavaScript library, because if you use the Performance Observer, you need to really understand what type of event is going to happen and how to execute that, etc. So it can become a bit, let's say, stressful sometimes to deal with the different types of events in JavaScript. So the library kind of has you covered there. And then, of course, what you can do is you can output that in analytics, similar to what you're kind of probably familiar with. So this is kind of a custom view where we collect performance metrics, those three that I mentioned before, and then you have like an overview of how does your average LCP, for example, look like, etc. So that's kind of the theory. I would say we get into it. Let's start with kind of trying to answer what impacts what, right? Because I think before we can really go into it, it's important to understand what type of optimization potentially has an impact on which metric, so that you know, once you have run your audits, that you know where to start. For Corvette Vitals, I try to provide a solid overview. It's a bit hard because there's sometimes overlap, right? But if you look at LCP, so the largest contentful paint, oftentimes we're talking about server response times, blocking scripts, and JavaScript, CSS, generally resource loading, as well as kind of client-side rendering issues. So to optimize for that, again, you need to work on a server, you need to work on the CDN, caching, as well as compression. Critical rendering path is something that we need to talk about. blocking times in general when you load certain things that are necessary for painting. So again, JavaScript, but also fonts, etc. Images is a huge topic. And then there's a bunch of like loading strategies where you can preload components, etc. First input delay is mainly, to be honest, around JavaScript. It can be third-party JavaScript. It can be your own JavaScript that's, for example, is a very huge file, and therefore then it just kind of keeps the main thread busy. So there's that. It's a lot of JavaScript things, splitting JavaScript, breaking up long tasks, eliminate all like polyfills that you potentially had used for kind of backwards compatibility of old browsers, etc. So this is around FID, and then shift. When we talk about CLS, it's often and almost always something that has to do with dimensions. So if you're kind of injecting banners and you haven't reserved, let's say, a spot for that, then of course you have a high CLS, which is what you don't want. So essentially images without dimensions, adds, embeds, iframes, again, without dimensions, but also fonts. So we're going to talk about fonts later a bit as well. And then kind of the optimization, I think, is relatively straightforward, mainly about size attributes, adding them, reserving required spaces, and then you have oftentimes almost kind of eliminated that entirely. So the concept I want to start with is the critical rendering path. And this is essentially kind of the code and resource that you require to render the initial view of a web page, right? So if you look at that conceptually, what we have is we have a section of a page that's critical, we call the initial view, and there's stuff, well, obviously then, which is not critical. So this is kind of the below the fold. If you think about it, of course, that also varies depending on the screen size, on the resolution, and the device type. Technically, this works like this. So what we have, or what we need, or what the browser needs, is the so-called Css Object Model. So essentially, it is kind of a map you can think of, where we have all the CSS styles that are found on a web page. It's a bit similar to the DOM, but it's for CSS, not for HTML, right? So if you think about, for example, you have a headline, and that headline has a certain font size, then this is what would be one map entry, or a background color of something else, or a font color of something else. So this is kind of the map that we're talking about, essentially understanding style sheets for HTML. Web browsers would use this CSS object model to actually render a page. So essentially, when they kind of go through the HTML and build the DOM, they see that there are CSS calls in there, one or multiple ones. And if it's an external CSS, the browser obviously needs to wait for the download to happen. And then it can combine the DOM with the CSS object model to create what's called the render tree. And only then the browser can actually display something on the web page. Google doesn't make, and that's quite interesting, I think, a single CSS GET request, because requesting external CSS is actually more expensive than inlining everything. And the developers now would say, well, oh Jesus, if you inline everything, it's extremely hard to maintain. It's extremely hard to kind of work with that, etc. I feel your pain. Actually, I learned, but that's a long time ago. I learned software development almost 20 years ago. So yes, I feel your pain. I like to use a tool called Critical, which is essentially it builds you a CSS that is required for the critical section of your page, and then a second one, so it's essentially splitting it up in the second one where like there's all the styles that are not needed straight away, and you can even do that with the tool in various desktop or mobile phone resolutions. So you could probably take your, let's say, top 5 resolutions that kind of serve 95% of your user base, and if you put it together, it's really cool. So if what you do is basically you inline only your critical CSS, right? So just the stuff that you need for above the fold. Then you would load the non-critical CSS asynchronously using the rel equals preload directive. Then once the file has been loaded, because, well, it can take a bit, but it doesn't matter because, well, we will only show it later anyways, then you apply the CSS once that had happened. And then you need a fallback, obviously, for non-JavaScript requests. So we use the good old NoScript. Plus, we implement what's called a polyfill for some of the, well, let's say old browsers, but they do support JavaScript, or when they do support JavaScript. So this is the fastest way of actually getting CSS delivered if you don't want to go full crazy on inlining everything. There is something that's really brand new, which I'm super excited about, which is called the content visibility property for CSS. So essentially, it enables the user agent to skip an element's rendering work, and including layouting and painting, which is the stuff that's the most expensive and takes most time. So until that is needed, and that makes, if you think about it conceptually, it's a bit like lazy loading for images. but not that you can only do it for images now. You could do it for entire paragraphs or divs or whatever. So super exciting. This is something that I think we will be hearing a lot more about in the next month. A big topic that I also want to address quickly is images or image optimization. Because, well, first and foremost, where do you find it? And I'll tell you why it's important. So one of the things that you could see in your Lighthouse, for example, is a recommendation to kind of properly size images, for example. And there's a whole bunch of more image recommendations, but roughly 60% of all web traffic is being made up of images, and that's a lot, right? So the average site gets like roughly almost 1 megabyte of images per single URL. And as you can see from the chart here, taken from HTTP archive, this is constantly growing, which is crazy. So, basic optimization should be done for everything and anything. I'm a big fan of tiny PNG, tiny JPEG. There's a whole bunch of others that can do image optimization work, whatever you feel like, but make sure that you do it. The reason why I like this one is it has an API, it has a WordPress integration, and it even has an integration into Photoshop. So, strategically, what you could do is you could even start the process very early on when your design team actually starts out building things and they export it, let them already kind of optimize. And then you don't have to do it afterwards, because that's what we see often in audits, that people just forget about it. There's no kind of automated solution when someone uploads a new image and then, well, you had your work done and then you need to kind of start again. Of course, compression, if you want to do it yourself and don't want to use on the kind of external service, ImageMin is great. There's also ImageMagick. There's a whole bunch of different solutions that you can actually use for that. At least make sure that you use something. WebP is kind of Google's alternative to all the old formats, JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs. They are all very, very old. It is effectively 30% smaller than JPEGs, 80% smaller than PNGs. It works in Chrome, Opera, and Android, so it kind of is there in terms of adoption. But I've been talking about this for almost 3 years now. So it took quite a while. You can use it kind of as on-the-fly replacement if you want. So you could just swap them out server side with a rewrite for on Nginx or Apache. You can of course also just do it on the front end. So if you use a picture element, it allows you to specify different types. You can see it here for our logo, right? So 2.5 kilobyte as a WebP versus over 7 as a PNG. So yeah, there's some good savings in there. There's a company called Best Buy in the US, just as a quick example here. It's basically done with a service called Claudinary. Claudinary does what I just told you, just at scale, because there's somewhat like an image CDN provider. So they would always pick the best format for you. So in this case, it's WebP, but it can also be, again, AVIF, which is something that I'm really excited about. Kind of again, new format that just shipped with Chrome 85 in the latest Firefox. And that, even in comparison to WebP, is again significantly smaller, which is kind of a collaboration between Google, Cisco, but also already Netflix and others are using it because they kind of manage the same quality, but are really, again, significantly smaller. Last thing about imagery, make sure that you also generate responsive images. One image for all the screen resolutions doesn't really work. It's just either too much overhead or too bad in terms of quality. So make sure that you do that. If you have no clue how to start with it, responsivebreakpoints.com is a great help. So you can put an image there, and it generates you the responsive variant. You can download and deploy it. Even gives you the code with it. Really cool. Or again, Claudinary can do that for you. The other thing that you see a lot, and this is the other big lever in terms of images, is something that says defer off-screen images. Essentially, what we talk about here is lazy loading. In the past, Google and others had been recommending a loader called Lazy Sizes, which, again, what it does is basically when you have an image that's not straight away in your viewport, it would essentially go and kind of load it only when you kind of scroll to it and it comes into the viewport. I think the concept is quite well known by now. There is an easier way, which is really great to do that, which is called native lazy loading. So essentially what you now just need to do is you need to add loading equals lazy to your images or to your iframes, which is, by the way, very exciting. So you can now finally make images and videos fast. Google supports it already. So yeah, if you're not using it for whatever reasons, make sure you do. Last comment on imagery, always specify dimensions, because that will prevent any CLS. It's super important if you have images that you specify width and height attributes, not only for images, but also for iframes, etc. The other big thing I want to talk about quickly is custom web fonts. So custom web fonts essentially are a performance killer if they're not done right. What you're looking for in Lighthouse is essentially something like this that says, ensure that the text remains visible during web font load. That would indicate that you're probably depending on some kind of third-party font, really. Over 70% of all sites are actually doing that. Again, over 100 kilobyte of additional data, oftentimes 4 to 5 additional requests. So that just takes a lot of time. This was kind of the traditional way to do it. You would just use kind of an external CSS, from, like, say, googleapis.com or whatever. Of course, again, if you think about it conceptually, that would mean that the browser first needs to download it, and it needs to be processed, so it just takes time. You could say, well, then I do it asynchronously, right? Because then I don't need to wait for it, which is great. But what happens is then that you oftentimes experience either void or FOUT, kind of either unstyled or invisible text, which is kind of causing this really this irritating flickering in the load process, which is super annoying, which you don't want, of course. One way to fight it is using a tool called Font Style Matcher. So Font Style Matcher would basically allow you to find the default font on your machine or on the kind of user's machine, and then style the custom font similarly to the default font by letter spacing, line heights, etc. At least, well, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but at least it makes it somewhat equal and reduces kind of this thing jumping around situation, which you certainly don't want. There is, however, because the browser vendors obviously understand that this is an issue, right? And this has been an issue for quite a while. They introduced what's called the font display strategies using CSS. And essentially, I think this one visualizes it quite nicely. You can go and make fonts non-blocking. By default, as I said, it would be blocking. But what you can go is you can say, well, either you just reduce the blocking period, or you could just go and say, well, you can download it in the background, and only for the second page view, you would be using, let's say, the custom font. But for the first page view, where it should be also really, really fast, you use the system default, and then you just do a swap, for example. If you're using Google Fonts, this has been introduced a bit later, but like finally there now as well. You can also use the same methodology by when you load this kind of from external service, in this case from Google. You can just append the parameter display equals swap, and you would have the same behavior as I just described for CSS. And then I want to also quickly talk about some of the more server-side-ish things, time to first byte, a bit of CDN situations, and more. Again, what you'll be seeing in Lighthouse, so this is for time to first byte, right? Reduce your server response times, of course. I see a lot of discussion around, like, should I even worry about TTFB anymore because it's not part of the Corvette Vitals? Well, yes, you should, because if your server is already slow, how can you then have other metrics being fast? Like, if the server, which is the first thing that needs to respond, is slow, not going to happen, right? So here's some orientation in terms of what you should be aiming for. And then if we talk about server-side already and CDNs, then there's also various hints in Lighthouse. This is, for example, saying reduce the impact of third-party code that is hosted on the Google CDN. If you work globally, CDNs can be really great help. I'm a huge fan of a website called CDNperf to find kind of the one that suits you best, because it is really depending on where you are and which regions you are predominantly serving. Not every CDN is working the same way in every geographic location. So don't just blindly pick one. Let's say if you serve the Asian region, that's a very different game as to serving North America. If you do both, then even more so, you need to think about it conceptually. If you want a CDN recommendation, though, and this is more from the kind of my geeky side of things, it's Cloudflare. Cloudflare has the concept called Cloudflare Workers, or the service called Cloudflare Workers, and a lot of other really cool things, by the way. They're doing a lot of amazing things on the web performance side. But anyways, yeah, check those out. They're super powerful. Essentially, they're kind of a serverless JavaScript, which is really, really cool. You can also preload certain key requests. So the idea is, if you know that something will be needed, then you can use kind of browser spare time early on and make sure that you get it done. So this is a waterfall diagram for a website that's actually relying on a CSS that's sitting on a subdomain. So what happens, of course, if you need the CSS, there needs to be a DNS lookup, and in this case, it's really, really slow. What we ended up doing is we ended up adding DNS prefetching in the head. So essentially, what then happens is the DNS lookup from like the IP to the domain name will be done already kind of almost immediately when the browser hits the statement. And so when the request happens, it's already done. So you don't need to wait for it. Since we're all on HTTPS connections by now, you should combine it. So DNS prefetch and pre-connect, because pre-connect, so the second statement essentially does also do like the SSL like negotiation, as well as like the certificate handshake. So that's all off the desk, and you can kind of request the resource almost immediately. You can do that also for, let's say, hero images. So if that, if you have a massive image that you need to be visible straight away when the browser hits the statement, then you could in your head already kind of add a preload, because that would then kind of especially prioritize critical imagery to be kind of loaded over the other existing images on a page. This now has also kind of landed just recently in Lighthouse, so the recommendation is now there. It has been a thing for a while already, but yeah, they now actively recommending this to everyone. One thing that I also want to address is performance budgets. So essentially, it's not done with a couple of those optimizations. It's more about creating awareness, and not only awareness, but also limitations beyond just the one team, and really make sure that people kind of commit to hard numbers. So essentially, what they introduced in Lighthouse a while ago is called Light Wallet. So what you can do is you could say like, well, my website is only allowed to have 300 kilobytes of scripts, or it always needs to load in a certain time frame. So let's say like the first meaningful pane needs to happen within like 2 seconds, for example. And you could even say, well, I have a tolerance of like 500 milliseconds, but if it's over, then it's over. You can do that for different types of connections, so Wi-Fi or just 3G or whatever. And if you do not know where to start, there's a really cool kind of tiny tool. It's called the Performance Budget Calculator. So it's somewhat allowing you to synchronize spending with your goals. So it gives a bit of a starting point and generates like this budget file, which is a JSON. So I think it's really important to kind of embrace those performance budgets and then really learn to live with them, or within them, actually, not only with them. And also make sure that the testing that you do and the budgets that you set are realistic, because like there's weak or weaker phones where you can just not go entirely crazy. To finish off, a couple of tool recommendations, kind of besides the regular Lighthouse that you all are familiar with. Of course, there is GSC, so Google Search Console, which now has a Corvette Vitals report, both for desktop and mobile. So this is like the real world data I mentioned earlier from the Chrome UX report. So this is something that you can work with. There's a Chrome Web Vitals extension, which is really helpful. So this is great. There's another Chrome extension that's called the Core SERP Vitals. So that gives you pane timings basically in the search results. So this is quite cool if you kind of want the numbers to be straight away visible. If you need to scale Lighthouse, because you need to test multiple URLs at once or want to, then there's a free tool called batchspeed.com, where you can just throw in a bunch of URLs, you get these nice overviews in comparison to each other, for example, or just at scale. Really helpful. If you do not want to, well, let's say if you want to run it on your own machine, but not as a SaaS, like with batch speed, then Lighthouse Parade, again, link is in the slides, is kind of a crawler, a Node.js command line tool that crawls through an entire domain and then compiles a report based on the Lighthouse performance data for every single page. And then we have what's called the Crux report, where you can kind of do report comparison at a glance, which is essentially allowing you to easily compare desktop versus phone results. So this is quite helpful if you need to kind of figure out certain things and want to compare them next to each other. Super helpful. One thing that I also enjoy a lot using is kind of the layout shift GIF generator. So if you need to visualize like shift scoring and things that are moving around, so this tool helps to kind of easily identify problematic shifts in the viewport on desktop as well as on mobile. And then it gives you like a GIF image that you can kind of embed. SpeedCurve is my kind of all you need web performance monitoring tool. It's probably by far the most comprehensive one on the market. It's really cool, but it's somewhat a bit more on the enterprise side of things. I think what's really important is that web performance is not really just a project you're just not done once you're done, but it's kind of an ongoing situation, an ongoing process. So make sure that you're not like just think, well, it's finished and I'm done, because things are somewhat moving around. And with that, yeah, you made it through. Thank you very much for dialing in questions. Happy to answer them. Shoot us an email. Also happy to share the slides. hi@pa.ag. And with that, I am switching off. Bye, y'all.
Thanks for that presentation, Bastian. Sticking with the topic of SEO, we now have Hayley Stansfield, Head of Content and PR at BlueClaw, and she'll be talking about link building for operators and affiliates with a particular focus on digital PR.
Hi everybody, I'm Hayley and I'm really excited to be speaking today at AffiliateCon, and today my talk will be on how to use digital PR to improve organic visibility for your affiliate website. So I'm presenting today on behalf of the agency I work for, BlueClaw, an agency that specialises in digital PR and SEO for affiliate and iGaming brands. I've worked on a fair few iGaming brands and affiliate brands in the past, all of which we've managed to secure top tier coverage for, including national publications. And just moving on to the agenda, today I'll be covering off the biggest PR challenges that affiliate brands face when it comes to PR and how to overcome them, the importance of a PR strategy that is in line with SEO, how to build those top tier links and media relationships as an affiliate brand, and lastly how to report on this activity and how it can benefit your overall SEO and visibility of the website. So some of the biggest challenges and obstacles of trying to build links for affiliate brands can be kind of general advertising restrictions, especially now they are even stricter due to the pandemic. And often journalists will prefer to feature a brand that isn't an iGaming client, regardless of the pandemic or not. So it can always be really difficult. But there are many ways to overcome these obstacles. Often brands can sometimes feel like their compliance issues and regulations can get in the way of creating standout campaigns as well. And it can be difficult to come up with these ideas that are both relevant to the brand and journalists at the same time. It can also be quite hard to target the keywords and landing pages that you're going after as part of your SEO strategy. So you just need to be really tactful and go about it in the right way. So how can you overcome these challenges as an affiliate brand? So in order to make sure that the PR activity is in line with SEO, it's really important to understand that Google appreciates trusted and organic content now more than ever. And this includes avoiding any paid link building in any way whatsoever, as much as you can. And Google wants to see content from websites that follow the EAT methodology, which stands for expertise, authority, and trust. And those are the 3 pillars that you should include when creating your content. So this means showing a really good understanding of the topic that you're talking about, making sure that you're building links from sites that also have really good authority behind them, such as national publications that are likely to provide a link back, making sure that they have a high trust flow and domain authority rating as well, and that they are a trustworthy website in general. And if you do all this, you will also minimise the chance of kind of being penalised by Google with their core updates, which could seriously impact your site's rankings and overall visibility as well. And that's why it's crucial for your PR activity to be in line with your SEO strategy. So with this in mind, and before starting your PR work, you want to begin by ensuring that you have the correct tools and insights in place before generating ideas. So this includes knowing what keywords you want to target, the landing page you want to push out, and that you have a really good understanding of where your competitor are building their links from as well. So, you know, looking at who's doing it right, what can we learn from their strategies as well. And all of that will also help to close the gap between you and your competitors. So you can take all of this information to make sure you have a comprehensive checklist in place, and that will make your reporting on your PR activity much easier and much clearer, as you'll be able to see exactly how it's impacted your overall authority and visibility of your website. So this includes making a note and kind of knowing where your key ranking positions are for the keywords that you want to target, knowing how much traffic goes to the landing page that you're trying to push, the domain authority of your site at the time before starting PR activity, which can be easily checked with a tool called Mozbar, and also looking at the number of backlinks you currently have to your website in comparison to your competitors. And all of that will make reporting an absolute breeze, and also helps us to communicate, one as an agency, or if you are an in-house PR expert trying to communicate your efforts and success of PR work, it makes it a lot easier because you can show the multiple benefits it has on the wider website and kind of goals as a business essentially. So as well as Mozbar that I just mentioned, there are many other tools that you can use to get this kind of insight. For example, Search Metrics allows you to use kind of look into how you currently rank for specific keywords online. Ahrefs and Majestic allows you to see how many backlinks you have to your website as well as to your competitors' websites. And there are many other tools that help get a good understanding of where you perform in the sector and how you sit between competitors as well. So it's definitely worth checking out some of those tools. Some are free, some are not free, and some of them you can get free trials from, and that might be enough to get the information that you need. So as well as these SEO insights, your own data can be really crucial to generating good ideas as well that's going to appeal to your target audience as well as journalists. So for example, you may want to use Google Analytics to see what types of people are most likely to interact with your brand and use your services. Facebook Insights is really good to seeing what types of content and kind of pages they follow online to get a good understanding of what kind of media they like and different topics. And also your own customer profiling data and sales data. So again, you're the best person to get access to a good understanding of your audience, including the age, sex and location data and the different splits between your audiences as well. Now, once you have all this information, you can look to generate ideas that will stand out in a crowded market, but will still earn the top tier media placements that you need to improve your site's overall visibility. And the key to this is really thinking outside the box, especially now advertising is stricter than ever. It's becoming even harder to get placements, especially for affiliate and iGaming brands. So just to recap, you want to make sure that the ideas are trustworthy for Google and are in line with your target audience, so your efforts aren't wasted at all, and that they also tie in with your target keywords that you want to rank for. So for example, the media love to hear about entertainment topics, you know, things that can actually resonate with their target audience as well as your own. You really need to be thinking about the reader of these publications. So you're essentially getting the best of both worlds then, interaction from top tier media, but also coverage for an idea that is in line with your target demographic as well. So I've also included some different types of content and campaign topics that tend to work really well for affiliate brands, which include entertainment such as lifestyle and pop culture, celebrity news, finance data, because journalists love big numbers, and prediction-based data as well. And also a topic that's performing really well at the moment is anything to do with the environment, impact on wider business and things like that. And in terms of these different sources you can use for campaign research, there are many different avenues you can actually take and forms of data that you can use. For example, your own unique sales data can be used to create a story. You may want to use third-party insights such as surveys and polls, readily available data such as government data, you know, for example, ONS or data from DirectGov, and also search trend data. So you can actually use Google Search Trends, which is a free tool to look at the level of interest in different topics, which is something that we've had a lot of success with recently. And again, it's a hugely trusted source for journalists because we like to think that Google doesn't lie. I've also included a list of some of the key data sources that you may want to take away and have a look at. Most of them are free. We do recommend Statista as well, which is £500 per month, so it's definitely not cheap. But again, you may be able to get a free trial to see if it's something that's going to be beneficial to you or your PR team, just for some content inspiration and seeing what data sets are out there. Now, once you have an idea, it's really time to start thinking like a journalist to make sure your concept also works for the media, and there are a few things to consider here. So journalists really want something that's going to be relevant to them. So before approaching a journalist, make sure that you know what topics they've covered before and that you're really getting to know their specialisms. Many journalists also want to be the first to hear about a story, so try to prioritise national publications initially when sending out a press release, and how those work are they get to cover the story and nobody else for 24 hours, but once that 24-hour passes you can then go out to the wider media, so it's definitely worth considering. Again, try to aim for publications, especially if you are offering a national placement or an exclusive, that you try to target publications that are likely to link back to your brand, so that exclusive isn't wasted as such. And just an example of this on this slide here, this shows that when we analysed over 10,000 articles from 4 of the main nationals in the UK, we can see that the Independent and the Sun are much likely to include backlinks to external websites other than kind of different publications such as the Express and the Mirror. Now, in terms of press releases, it's really important to make sure that the language you use is going to appeal to both the journalists and the readers of their stories. So you want to use language that people will relate to and that will reel people in as well. So that includes terms such as shocking, warning, experts advise that, all to create a standout story. And aside from kind of, you know, your larger data research-led pieces, there's an opportunity to newsjack as well. So if there's something going on in the media that you are relevant enough to jump on or that you have an opinion on to talk about, that's a really good opportunity to get some additional coverage and links for your brand as well. And next, you want to make sure that the story is straight to the point and is easy to consume by the reader and the journalist. Journalists really like articles that are in a listicle style format, so the top 10, for example, something that is visual, that it may use user generated content, use graphs to bring the data to life, and again, something that includes big financial numbers and celebrity names is always a big winner. If you do happen to be doing a bigger research piece that is hard to show all of the data just through an infographic or a static map, for example, it may be that you consider displaying the data in an interactive format. So then it's going to be a lot easier for journalists to toggle through and create their own story themselves by using your data. And again, making sure that the content and the research is new and that it hasn't been covered before. And this is something that you really want to stress to when pitching to journalists as well. So now you have all of the right tactics in place and strong ideas to go out to the media with. This is where you can start to report on the success of your activity, and this is where those insights come in handy that you had before from your SEO insights. So this means that you're now able to see exactly how many links you've secured over a period of time, how that has increased your overall number of backlinks on your website in comparison to competitors. You'll be able to see how much traffic the PR work has generated to those key landing pages you wanted to push, and over time you'll also be able to see any key changes in ranking positions for the keywords that you've been focusing on. So this works over a longer period of time, such as 12 months, for example, but you'll also be able to see how your domain authority rating for your website has hopefully improved. And this will be made easier because you had a note of all those different metrics before starting, for example, a 12-month PR plan. So just going into that into a bit more detail, for example, we can see here by using search metrics how the overall visibility of the website for this client improved over a 12-month period of conducting link building activity and when those increases took place. So you want to be using the data from all of these insights to inform your future strategy as well. So for example, it may be that a campaign worked really well in December and that's actually surprising to you as a brand. So next year, you want to make sure that you are doing link building activity around that time again. And lastly, on this slide, we can see how the position in the search for those individual keywords have improved. So if you now rank for those specific keywords on pages higher up in Google than you did previously, like here, we can see for our client, they ranked on the top 2 pages on Google originally for their target keywords, and after the PR activity was done, they were then ranking on the first page for those terms. And some terms also jumped 5 positions or more, which again happened across a longer period of time. But all this is possible because you knew exactly where you ranked for those keywords before you did the activity, and it's a good way to attribute the PR work to that as well. So just to summarise all of what we have spoken about today, our key takeaways include remembering the importance of a joined up approach with your SEO strategy, because that makes reporting much easier, much clearer, and also helps to communicate just how effective PR can be on the overall visibility of your website. Remembering to focus on the journalists and readership of publications that you're reaching out to increase your chances of securing those top tier links. And that includes using fresh and unique data. And lastly, feeling free to branch out of your comfort zone and having the confidence to speak about something that's outside of the brand and isn't too focused on the brand, especially now advertising restrictions are super strict. So I really hope you enjoyed my presentation today, and feel free to reach out to myself or the BlueClaw team. Our contact details are on the slide there, and I hope you all take care and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that presentation, Hayley, and that concludes our talks on SEO. Next up, I'll be speaking with Kian Nugent, Managing Director Racing of Spotlight Sports Group and also Chairman of Responsible Affiliates in Gambling. Hi Kian, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi Tim, no problem at all. Glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. And recently you've been appointed Chairman of the Responsible Affiliates in Gambling Group. And so to start off with, I thought we could ask, for any viewers who maybe aren't familiar with RAIG or RAIG, I'm not sure if anyone pronounces it like that, or perhaps wants to know more about the UK affiliate market in general, could you tell us a little bit about your organization's aims and exactly what it does?
Yeah, sure. I think, firstly, probably a little bit of context is useful. I think, for those of us working in affiliate businesses, we talk about the kind of affiliate industry as this very niche little thing, but actually, especially when you look at it in the UK, it's exceptionally diverse. I think, both in terms of the types of products that affiliates offer, as well as the kind of scale and size and type of, companies or individuals or businesses that you get operating in it, whether media companies and that type of thing. So I think the definition of what an affiliate is not even remotely as narrow as we sometimes think it is. So to a degree, with that in mind, the concept of a kind of a representative body for affiliates has been under discussion for a long time. But in early 2019, Racing Post, Odds Checker and Better Collective got together and over the course of a couple of months kind of set up RAIG. The primary aim, or what we were trying to do, was to, well, I think firstly kind of bring together a representative body for affiliates, because there was nothing in place. But the primary aim of the association really was to look at how we could help raise standards, particularly as it kind of relates to safer gambling. For lots and most affiliates, the kind of safe promotion of gambling was already a priority. But, rather than the direction, let's say, coming from a kind of a bookmaker and the types of restrictions that they would pass down from the UK Gambling Commission, we really wanted to take the lead on it and, kind of collectively look at ways or initiatives that we could engage in where we were helping to raise standards, I think, above and beyond just those basic requirements, and making sure that we were really leading the way on it and not just having kind of responsible gambling requirements just seen as this thing that was imposed on us.
How would you rate the kind of progress you've achieved to that end so far?
I would think it's probably in ways been more difficult than we would have expected at the outset. There's probably been a dual track approach almost. The first has been trying to make that body as representative as possible. As I said, it started off with only the three of us as the kind of founding members. So one of the things that we've obviously tried to do is grow that in terms of numbers and obviously grow that as well in terms of representation. So the different types of affiliates and the different voices that we have within that conversation. And then I think, we've tried a lot in terms of trying to engage with, people on the government side of things, on the regulatory side of things, obviously on the operator side of things as more of a collective rather than, and dealing with people at the BGC or at operators that are at a level where it's not just you're talking to an affiliate manager or whatever it might be. So I think I would say we're still probably in the early stages of some of the things that we would like to try and achieve, and the kind of wider initiatives that we would like to bring on board. One of the things that we've been looking at for the last couple of months is just, I think, ways that we can introduce training for affiliates, and we kind of looked across. Across, I think, the industry, I guess, at some of the training programs that were available, and obviously they were very, very focused on operators. And while a lot of what affiliates do from a marketing perspective is similar to what operators would do, a lot of what we do is very different. You know, we don't have one-to-one interactions with customers for the most part. So we're basically talking to a company at the moment about tailoring a training program specifically for affiliates, because I think it's one thing to have the kind of, you know, the intention to be a compliant business that, you know, does its best to promote gambling in a safer way. And it's another thing then, I think, to make sure that cascades down through the levels, to make sure your staff understand what that means, to make sure that they're trained in such a way where it comes naturally to them, rather than being you know, kind of an almost by rote process that they have to stick to. I think you avoid mistakes more, you avoid more mistakes if people kind of fundamentally understand what it is that you're trying to do.
Sure, and highly relevant to that at the moment and to your organization is the ongoing and upcoming UK Gambling Act review. And you spoke with our affiliate publication, Trafficology, recently, and you spoke a bit about that. You spoke about kind of an evidence-based approach. How confident are you that the gambling industry here, affiliates and operators alike, will get a sort of fair trial in that any regulation that's put forward is based on, you know, genuine, tangible evidence?
Look, I think it's extremely difficult to kind of say exactly how it is going to play out over the next months and possibly years. I mean, I think you only have to look at the affordability review that the Gambling Commission is undergoing at the moment, and I think they got over 13,000 responses to the call for evidence. So, you know, we are dealing with something very complex here, and I mean, the scale of the challenge is massive. Now, I mean, I guess all we know at this stage is how DCMS basically have framed the kind of the call for evidence, the terms of reference for the review itself, and the way that is presented, certainly to us, would give you some hope, you know, that a measured, evidence-based approach will be taken to any changes that they decide to make. Like, I think, you know, the review itself, like, obviously one of the big things it is trying to catch up on is probably technology advances since the Act first came in. And like, that is one thing I will say, is that I think, you know, the advances that we as an industry have made can be both positive as well as negative. Like, nobody has a bigger body of data and evidence in terms of consumer behavior and in terms of, you know, being best placed to kind of implement evidence-based approaches to assuring, you know, the safest possible gambling environment for all users. So I think it's important that is factored in. I think it's very easy, you know, and I think probably even as it's getting closer to the time, it's very easy for sensationalist almost headlines to kind of take over, and I think the operators and maybe affiliates to a lesser degree are seen by some people as being the enemy, but as I said, I think, you know, like they also are at the coalface here in terms of dealing with customers of every different type, including, you know, those that are at risk of problem gambling. And I think, you know, it's really important that just like the evidence from them, obviously, as well as all of the other different areas, are factored into whatever actions are taken at the end of the review.
Yeah, a couple of key things you mentioned there. One was the Gambling Commission survey, and I was one of the 13,000 respondents, but I know the Racing Post also promoted it as much as they could in terms of getting the message out there to, if you care about gambling in this country and this market, you know, have your say. The other thing you touched on, obviously, affordability. And I've been wondering a lot, if greater affordability checks are introduced, we're not quite sure, you know, how exactly they will be, if they will be, but if they are, we can imagine the impact on operators. But how does it affect UK affiliates? Because it's slightly different, isn't it?
Well, it's different in one way and the same in another way. Just to actually touch on the point, yeah, like, we've obviously had a lot of coverage in the Racing Post in relation to affordability, and I think one of the key things there is that, you know, that people that enjoy, like, probably for the most part, the people that enjoy having a bet on whatever it is that they want to have a bet on, you know, and view it as an acceptable kind of leisure activity or an acceptable way for them to spend their money. Probably a lot of them have no idea of what's going on in the background in terms of, you know, affordability reviews, regulatory reviews, you know, Gambling Act reviews, that type of thing. And I think that was one of the kind of aims for us, was that people were educated, as, you know, and understood what was actually going on, and then, like you said, like we're able to have a voice in that. I think it's important that that it's just not always the lens of how we look at these things. The lens of how these things are reviewed is not just on the negative side of things and the potential negative impact of it. So then, sorry, to go back to your question, like I think, to be perfectly, like it's going to obviously depend on like what limits get imposed, and also how they're implemented, whether it's kind of background checks or whether it's very much, I guess, in your face in terms of having to send in pay slips or bank statements or whatever it might be. So it's very, like we don't know the kind of scale of what the impact to the industry is going to be until we have more information on that. But I think on a proportionate basis, affiliates will be equally as impacted as the operators will be. A lot of affiliate commercial models are obviously linked in some way, either directly or indirectly, to an operator's commercial model, and so from that perspective, while the overall kind of actual number might be different, I think the proportional scale of it will be the same. And I think depending on the type of affiliate, their overall exposure to the UK market, like it could obviously be seriously damaging to them and their businesses.
And what advice would you give to RAIG members and other affiliates? I take your point that you said we don't quite know exactly what's going to come in if anything comes in, but once any new regulations are introduced, kind of how would you advise affiliates to respond?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think probably the most obvious thing is that if and when new regulations do come in, it's obviously important that all affiliates, like they are now, are trying to be compliant with them in every way they possibly can. But I think like as it relates to this year, it's almost, to me, kind of like a step too late at the time the regulations come in. I would view it as being really important that affiliates, no different to the previous point on kind of customers, that affiliates really engage with this process, understand what's actually going on, understand the potential impact, and try to make sure that their voices are heard in this debate. Like affiliates play a really important role in the kind of wider gambling ecosystem, and I think it's really important that the people that are going to conduct these reviews and ultimately decide what will or won't be implemented, that they understand that role that affiliates play. And I think I would also think about it particularly in the context of the kind of wider, safer gambling efforts that the industry wants to get behind, that again, affiliates play a unique but potentially very important role in that. And so I think making sure that we're understood, like engaging with the process, making sure the kind of wide range of what affiliates do, and making sure that's understood and not just potentially viewed in a negative light, but actually properly understood, I think is a very important thing over the next couple of months, and making sure that that as part of any new, as I said, regulations that come in, that is considered.
Yeah, you talked about the importance of the kind of the voice of affiliates in any debate, and obviously there's the public narrative, and you mentioned earlier that there's sensationalist headlines and there can be a negative narrative quite often with gambling. A point your predecessor Clive Hawkswood raised with us when he took the role of your current role of chairman at the time. He said the actions of certain bad actors in the industry will always kind of affect the sector's reputation as a whole. So, one bad sort of act, the newspapers jump onto it, the whole industry is affected, that kind of thing. In the current climate, especially with pandemic and lockdowns, how can the affiliate industry in general kind of try and safeguard against this?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a couple of things in that. So the first is, I think if someone is set on being a bad actor, I don't think there's anything that we or anybody can necessarily specifically do about them. That's a choice that they've made in terms of how they want to run the business. Obviously, a key focus for us within RAIG is, and our affiliate businesses is the channeling of customers to fully regulated and licensed operators. But I think, probably going back to the previous point I made, the risk to us, then also, you have risks around a well-intentioned business making a mistake as it relates to this, and and it being a bad act, without necessarily them being a bad actor. And I think that goes back to the kind of education and training point, and making sure that we have as much protection in place to make sure that that our actions kind of match our intentions as businesses. And then I think the bit that we can do in terms of safeguarding is, like I said, probably at best the affiliates in the affiliate industry are misunderstood. At worst, we're seen through a negative light in terms of the overall industry. And I think it's really important that we explain to people and educate people on that role that we play in the wider kind of, I guess, spectrum of the industry. The service that we provide to customers, the part that we play in their user journey. In many cases, the very, very different relationship that we have with customers compared to the relationship that an operator would have with a customer. So I think, affiliates is obviously a very common business model across loads of other sectors, and is almost always, a business that is there to benefit the end customer in some way or other, whether it's through choice, through education, through kind of information. So like it's as I said, it's a common business practice across loads of other industries, and I think, but as I said, it is probably in the wrong places, at least misunderstood as it relates to gambling. And I think that is the role that we can play in terms of trying to safeguard against the bad actor element of it, is making sure that the good actor element of it is properly understood, and the steps that we're taking and like how we run our businesses is properly understood, and we're seen we're seen, I guess, as the kind of the compliant businesses that we are.
Certainly, yeah. And as you talk to us now, as well as RAIG, you of course represent Spotlight Sports Group and the Racing Post. So just a word from that perspective. What are the group's plans? Because I know you're a key affiliate in the UK market. What are the group's plans for 2021 in the UK? Given that also this Gambling Act review we've talked about, we don't know how, but it may affect your operations, for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, the Spotlight Sports Group, we obviously have an international and B2B focus, as well as what we do as an affiliate business in the UK. So, those threads are obviously continuing as well. But I think probably from the UK perspective, the thing that we're mostly focused on is, at least from a delivery perspective, is we're in the middle of a complete rebuild of the Racing Post's digital properties at the moment, both the apps and the web. We're probably different from most affiliates in that, we are different from most affiliates in we offer an integrated betting service where, you can bet directly through the Racing Post with most of the major bookmakers in the UK. And last year we completed the integration of Sky Bet, which took us to basically 7 integrated bookmakers in the app. And since then we've kind of begun rebuilding that. So we've all our technology is handled in-house, and we in kind of early last year basically decided that we wanted to completely rebuild that proposition. We had all the bookmakers that we wanted in it, and that the way that we could deliver the most value to our customers was by upgrading the technology platform. So the app itself, the apps across Android and iOS should launch in the summer of this year, and we're really excited actually about some of the things that we'll be bringing to the table, and what we'll be able to do with that for our customers.
Yes, certainly sounds like a busy time. A final question for you. This concerns Spotlight Sports Group and RAIG and in general. Can I ask your sort of your outlook, your broad outlook for UK affiliates in 2021, given everything we've discussed and given everything that's on the horizon? Hopefully there can be some positive messages in there. But yeah, do you have any projections, or maybe not quite crystal ball predictions, but your take on the year ahead? Yeah,
I definitely don't have a crystal ball, but I think there was a couple of key probably messages. The first is that some of the things that are going to unfold this year, while are not necessarily fully in our control, are not necessarily something that we should sit on the sidelines and just watch happen either. So like we have an important contribution to make to everything that's ongoing. I think, for not just affiliates, for anyone operating in the UK gambling space, 2021 is going to be a transformational year. I think as I said earlier, like I'm hopeful that like an evidence-based approach will be taken to any action that is taken as a result of the reviews, and so I think that would certainly give some hope. I think the Gambling Act review was due. It originally came in 16 years ago, and it was intended that it would be reviewed on a regular basis to keep pace with change, and that clearly hasn't happened, and there's a bit of catch up to be played now. So, but as I said, I think it has been set out in a way that is certainly at least a couple of steps removed from some of the more sensationalist stuff that we've seen and the bad press that we've seen over the last number of, gather pace over the last number of years. And look, I would say that the one huge positive that I would see is that the review of the Gambling Act in particular has been looming for a while. It's now started. We have some idea of time frames, and at least once we come out the far side of it, we will have a degree of certainty, over what the kind of, I would think, medium to long-term future of the UK market will look like, the type of regulations that will be in place, the type of operating environment that will be there. And I think, look, all any business can ask for is kind of, certainty in terms of knowing what the long-term outlook looks like.
Well, Cian, thank you very much for your time and for your insight, and best of luck with everything with RAIG and Spotlight Sports Group in 2021.
No problem at all. Thanks very much.
We'd like to thank Cian for his contribution, as well as Bastian and Hayley earlier. A huge thanks to all our Affiliate Con Club members, and thank you all of you for watching. And once again, thank you to our supporting brands, 7 Stars, G&G Affiliates, Active Wins, 24/7 Partners, Nito Partners, Common Connect, Kashi Mashi, Stars Affiliate Club, 22Bet, Karamba, Kindred Affiliates, Bet It On, Play Attack, and Bet365 Affiliates. For more learning, check out our classroom content before the next Affiliate Con Virtually Live, and don't forget to fill out your affiliate profile and check out the available offers from our partners. Be sure to use the button to share your profile with them. See you next time.